I'm Dr. John Gartner.
And I'm Dr. Harry Segal.
And welcome to another session of Shrinking Trump.
This is our 52nd episode, John, and to all of you. And just to remind you who we are both clinical psychologists. We are both experts in personality disorders and cognitive decline. And we got together for this show during the campaign because we were very concerned by what we saw as Trump's cognitive decline. And we had long been concerned about his severe personality disorder known as malignant narcissism, which accounts for Trump's sociopathic behavior. We're seeing a lot of grift these days, if you've noticed, breaking rules, not caring about conventions, having no empathy for others, not to mention pathological lying, which has really become completely out of control now. Yeah. So we were warning about this. We wanted the press to know about it. We wanted the political elites to know about it. But sadly, he became president for the second time. And we have been watching him with a wrecking ball, going after international trade, the global order, our economic system, our judicial system, including the Bill of Rights. And we're still here, right, John? We're still here saying, look at this guy, please pay attention. And so here we are. What do you think about this week, John?
Here we are. Well, we're going to talk about the orgy of corruption. But before we do, I think you wanted to bring up something that we're noticing about Trump, which is that there is a response to pushback. And you wanted to talk about that. We're now seeing this in multiple areas.
Yeah, we've been trying to understand Trump's relationship to aggression, right? One thing about malignant narcissists is they're extremely comfortable with aggression, more so than most people, because they don't feel remorse, they don't have empathy, they don't worry about what they're doing as it affects other people. They will worry about how it affects them. In fact, that's all they worry about. Yeah. So what we've noticed with Trump in really across the board, it began with the notion that we borrowed from David Brooks, who said, Trump is not transactional. He's an extortionist. That is, it's not that Trump wants you to make a deal. He threatens you until you make a deal. And if you say yes to an extortionist, he'll extort you for more. And Brooks was exactly right about that. And that's how John and I were thinking about him. And if you add extortion to a malignant narcissist who by their character celebrates destruction, which often leads to self-destruction, then we thought, put on our seatbelts because Trump won't be able to self-regulate. In other words, he won't be able to pull back because
he'll be able to pull out of the dive.
Right. He'll be on a destruction spree, right? But what we're noticing about him is something actually less extreme than that, however, very dangerous and concerning to all of us and should be, which is he does extreme things. And if there's enough pushback, he pulls back part way, doesn't pull back all the way.
Right.
So, for example, with the tariffs, the 145% tariffs on China, which was destroying the trade. I mean, we are so tied up with China as far as global trade and our buying their products. I mean, we were looking at a crash of the economy like you wouldn't believe, world economy. And Trump believed, of course, because he said it and was doing it, that he was right. So he was saying, it's fine, it's no problem. Look, you don't have dolls, it'll be okay. You need less dolls. But Scott Bessent, his Treasury Secretary, after a while, clearly won the day, beat out Pete Navarro, who's crazy, and Luttman, who's stupid, and said to him, "You can't do this. You're taking us all down." I imagine this is what's happened because Trump after the first weekend where people began to negotiate, I think in Geneva with China, he blinked.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he didn't blink. He can't blink all the way. He didn't take everything back, but he pulled back to 30%,
Mm-hmm.
with China leaving 10% on our side. And although that still is going to wreak havoc to the economy, 30%, and it's only for 90 days, it's another 90-day pause, he pulled back enough to calm the markets.
Right.
And my 401k is rising. John sold all of his, but it's rising because I didn't sell mine. Sorry, I couldn't help teasing you.
I sold half. Just to be.
But eventually, I'm worried that he's going to crash everything, and I'll be left holding the bag, the empty bag.
Yeah.
But in any case, this idea that you do something extreme until something pushes you back reminds me of what we used to call the FDR driving rule. And what that means is, if you're driving on the FDR highway in Manhattan, that's on the east side, it's basically a highway, that New Yorkers are such horrible drivers that they don't signal when they want to change lanes. They just turn into a lane, and if someone honks, they turn back. And that's really right. And that's what we're seeing with Trump. We're also seeing it even with the courts, although he's pushing as hard as he can. But if you push him, he says, well, we're going to obey the Supreme Court, which he may or may not do. But my guess is it's going to be the same thing. He's going to push as far as he can, and then he'll creep back just enough so that he somehow doesn't suffer. I don't, it's not a prediction. It's just a comment. So I wanted to bring up one more thing, if I can. Because John and I had a disagreement a few weeks ago because he was talking about judges appointed by Trump who were ruling in favor of these terrible moves by the Attorney General and by the Trump administration. And I agree, they're horrible. But I said to John, let's not put down all of the judges appointed by Trump because they were chosen by Mitch McConnell and the Senate confirmed them. And, you know, these are people who had a judicial history. It wasn't like they were just taken off the street like Trump's cabinet, you know,
or taken
like
off.
Pete Hegg said. Right? I mean, Jesus Christ. So last week, if you remember, there's been the Venezuelans who were deported without due process to that horrible prison in El Salvador. And there's been all of this pushback, although it's been really weak and slow. And Tom Holman, who's Trump's hood, you know, who's like really out of central casting. He's just such a monster.
He really is.
I mean, he's just so horrible. Anyway, a judge in Texas, Fernando Rodriguez Jr., ruled in Texas, a district of Texas, that the Alien Enemies Act cannot be used against people the Republican administration claims are gang members invading the U.S. And so he said, you can't do that, which is the first judge to say that. And he was a Trump-appointed judge. So I'm talking to John, you know, because we talked during the week. So we're trying to get this show together, and we have another job or two. And we have two other jobs. And I said to John, what about Fernandez and Rodriguez in Texas? And John said, yeah, but what about Stephanie Haynes in Pennsylvania? And I looked her up. And Stephanie Haynes, who was in Western Pennsylvania, said that Trump could use the Alien Enemies Act from 1798 to deport Venezuelans. And I thought, oh, yeah, maybe John's right. Maybe most of them are just hoods. But then I looked it up. And although Stephanie did support the Alien Enemies Act, like there's an invasion of Pittsburgh by Venezuela. On the other hand,
the hills of Western Pennsylvania are filled with gang members. I'm telling you, it's not even safe to go out anymore.
Especially not with your pets. But what I found was, but then I looked into it further, and she said the government could use the AEA, but each person had to have 21 days to process what happened, and they needed each person to have due process. And again, this was a Trump-appointed judge. I just want to point out that the judiciary is pushing back, even people, MAGA people, even people appointed by McConnell. And it gives me a bit of hope, not a lot, but we have to recognize when there isn't a monolithic right wing that's just taking over the country, but that there's a process of it. Hey, everyone, thanks for giving me so much time to talk. John, I'm done. What do you have to say?
It's not that they're not part of the vast right-wing conspiracy, but there's a normal curve of how corrupt members of the vast right-wing conspiracy are. And some people are just to the right of the mean. Okay. So they do have a limit. Like, they'll bend for Trump, but they won't break. I think actually what the judge did, well, they might even bend over, but they won't break. They won't break their back. They won't break the rule of law completely. So in other words, it is pandering to Trump to let him use the Alien Enemies Act because it's just 100% bullshit. It's just not
100%. 100%.
We can joke all we want, but there is no fucking and she's actually supposed to be talking about her region. There is no invasion of Argentinian gang members in Western Pennsylvania. I'm not sure there are any. Those are, I can't pronounce that gang. Argua. I don't think there's any of them in Western Pennsylvania. Okay, none. I suspect there's, you could stop at every truck stop all along the mountains of Western Pennsylvania. You're not going to run into any of those that Argentinian gang. So it's 100% lie. Okay, she's saying, oh no, that's okay. You can do that. You can use this extreme emergency measure on the basis of zero evidence. That's A-okay with me.
That's true. But, but
I can't be seen as, or actually be, a complete whore, okay, who literally destroys the rule of law, root and claw. Because due process, Harry, it doesn't just go back to the Constitution. It goes back to the damn Magna Carta in the 1400s, okay? Anyone who's gone to one day of law school knows that if you deny due process, you're destroying the rule of law, period. Period. No Pam Bondi, no executive orders, no three-card Monty. So yes, she didn't go all the way. She didn't do a full Aileen canon. Okay. She just Eileen Cannon. All right. She just bent. She bent over, but she didn't break. Now, I realize that in today's MAGA conspiracy, she should practically get like an award for that. Good citizenship award. Okay, but I will say this other guy you talked about, he rejected it. Okay, he rejected it altogether. Utterly. And it's interesting. I noticed he does have a Hispanic surname, and maybe that does give him some more sense of, hey, you can't just demonize our people, and use that as a basis for destroying, the rule of law. I remember he once had a ruling by a Mexican American judge. He was so upset. Oh, it was a Mexican judge. But anyway, this guy is standing up. So this guy's standing up. She's bending over, but not breaking. Okay, it's a normal curve.
Listen, when you have Stephen Miller, as we're going to see later, advocating for taking away habeas corpus, when we have an administration that's literally saying this is what we want, and you have a judge in Pennsylvania saying, "I'm not going to approve of anything without due process." I mean, 21 days each. I mean, that basically stops Trump's process of taking people in the middle of the night and putting them on a plane. It stops it, John. And that's what yes, it's awful that she supported the AEA. I get it. But man, if we just have people stopping, I know it sounds like a lot to ask, but if they can just not tear up the Constitution, I'm happy. Well, I'm not happy, but I'm not as scared.
I understand. No, it's important. And it kind of gets back to that principle of, he goes to such extremes that then there's sort of a pullback, not all the way, but part way.
Thank God it's only 30% on Chinese goods. That's still going to screw a lot of small businesses. Prices are going to go up and shelves are going to be empty. I mean, it's going to happen anyway, but less. So suddenly we're relieved that Trump pulled back. Maybe he is brilliant after all, John. Maybe this was part of a grand strategy, right?
Well, one thing it certainly is successful as doing at is manipulating the markets. I mean, Trump's whims and moods are better predictors of the market than just about any other economic factor that you could mention, which is why, the people who are close to him constantly are cashing in. He literally telegraphed, now would be a good time to buy stocks. I mean,
exactly.
He tweeted that out one time, and then he made some announcement about tariffs and everything went up. And so it's like, okay, it's like insider training, but on the outside.
It's incredible, isn't it?
But again, in plain sight.
In plain sight.
So speaking of that, I'd like to get to the Caligula level orgy of corruption.
You're cracking me up today, John. Keep going.
Good, I'm doing my job. I mean, it's so obscene. It's just so obscene. I mean, it really is vomitatious, and I'm not going to be too explicit about the unnatural sex acts that took place in the court of Caligula, but you can just visualize that's how perversive this is. It's not just corruption, and even this term corruption on steroids now is a little bit extreme, but he's showing a brazen willingness to monetize the White House in any and every way that a person could think of. Not just to do it blatantly, but to do it this way, to do it that way, to do it upside down, to do it with a fox, to do it in a box, like green eggs. He's every way he can monetize the White House. For example, by the way, we have two tapes from Chris Murphy. I really want to give Chris Murphy a lot of credit here. He has been really doing what we've been saying Democrats should be doing. He's been tracking Trump's corruption and anti-constitutional measures, and he's been putting out very pointed tweets, about each and every one. He's been questioning people, very aggressively in hearings. He actually gave this presentation 40 ways that Trump is violating the Constitution or being corrupt. So he's getting into the weeds, and he's really using his voice. So here he's talking about a club that Trump started, a club called the Executive Branch.
Donald Trump and his family members and backers are opening a new club in Washington. It's called the Executive Branch, and it is corruption on steroids. The Executive Branch is a private club, and reportedly the initiation fee is over $500,000. They are advertising this club as the place where CEOs and foreign oligarchs and tech bros can come to get secret access to Donald Trump, Donald Trump's family, and members of the cabinet. So if you are a multimillionaire or a billionaire, you have a new way that you can pay Donald Trump and his family members for the privilege of getting secret private access to the people that are regulating your industry or determining American foreign policy. Just because the corruption is playing out in public for everybody to see doesn't mean that it's not mass-scale corruption. We have never seen anything like this before in American history. And the executive branch is just the latest example of the ways in which this White House is openly and publicly monetizing the executive branch for the enrichment of Donald Trump and his family members.
What I love is every time one of these schemes come out, people say, we've never seen anything this openly corrupt. This is corruption on steroids. Well, folks, I'm just beginning our presentation today. As you can imagine, we're going to roll out some of the others, most of which you've probably read about. But here's the thing. He's actually, when we say he's monetizing the White House, we actually mean it literally. Can I just show you this headline, Harry? Okay. Sure. I'm not going to read from the article. Was it auction to dine with Trump creates foreign influence opportunity? So I'll just summarize for you. So he's saying to the people who buy the most Trump coins, like, the most tens or hundreds of millions of Trump coins, are going to be invited to a special dinner at Mar-a-Lago where they can hang out with him and influence him. But the person who buys the most coins of everybody, $1 billion of the coins, he's raffling off a trip to the Oval Office. That person, the person who puts the most money in his grubby pocket, right, that bulges his pocket with the most greenbacks, that person gets to have a special tour of the Oval Office. He's literally raffling the Oval Office.
He's just giving access to people who support him. No, it's so vile and corrupt. Rachel Maddow actually did a piece on this because they kept changing the details of this so that people was buying in, then they would change how little access you would have, and then you'd have more access. It's no, if you're like that crypto guy from Asia who bought $10 million worth of these coins, if you have
300 million, I think it was
300, if you have money like that, yeah, you get your dinner or your tour of the Oval Office.
Or in his case, his company was actually under some kind of criminal investigation, which was dropped. And he's affiliated with TikTok. That's that little Chinese company that made bought $300 million. They're connected to TikTok. Well, TikTok is a Chinese social media company that actually I happen to I watch it. And my wife likes to watch all the pets on there. She can't. So it's a great product, but they're also probably using it to surveil and influence the United States. So again, it just affects our. And I think the Supreme Court ruled about something about how we had to take TikTok offline, and then Trump didn't do it because people like TikTok. But so actually, that's one way he's actually not obeying the court. But no one's complaining about that one because we like TikTok. But the point is, they're going to have all this influence over him. But let's get to the pièce de résistance, the corruption, Harry. It's like larger than life. It's larger than a 747. ABC broke this story about Qatar, offering Donald Trump a $400 million plane that he'll use as Air Force One and then take with him when he leaves the presidency. So in other words, it's a gift to him, a $500 million gift to him. Okay. The only problem with this is that, aside from the graft, because it's never enough for him to have the corruption. There has to be corruption rolled up with treason.
Kind of a twofer. It's a twofer.
Right. So not only is he selling, the office, but he's selling out the country, because just so people know about Qatar, Qatar is one of the main financiers of Hamas. We're deporting, graduate students from Ivy League universities because they've written op-eds in support of the Palestinian cause. But no one is saying that it's okay to be on the Hamas cause. They're funding the actual people who are actually doing the terrorism. And they're great allies of Iran. So we know that they're going to bug the hell out of this plane, and we don't think Pete Hegseth and his geniuses are going to be able to sniff out the bug. So he's also giving intelligence, basically, because they're going to have eyes and ears on that plane, no matter what they do, to our enemies. So it's not enough that he's taking a $500 million bribe. He's selling out the country to our enemies. And so they're deporting these people for anti-Semitism. But meanwhile, if you give him a $500 million plane, sure, go blow up all the Jews you want. What do I care?
The president faces backlash over a $400 million proposed gift from Qatar, a luxury Boeing 747.
And I could be a stupid person and say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane.
These photos showing what's been described as a flying palace that would replace the aging Air Force One, with 2 furnished floors, plush carpets, leather seats, and 2 bedrooms. The administration claiming the gift would be legal, insisting Qatar is getting nothing in return. Trump saying it's a gift to the Pentagon and the plane will transfer to the Trump Presidential Library Foundation once he leaves office. But critics on both the left and the right blasting the gift as unethical and citing national security concerns.
Taking sacks of goodies from people who support Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al Jazeera, all the rest, that's not America first.
Would we let another country decorate the Oval Office? Would we let another country build the Situation Room? Would we let another country wire the press office? Oh, wait. Air Force One is all three.
The jet would also have to meet the strict Air Force requirements for presidential aircraft.
It would have to go through a security sweep to search for listening devices and tracking devices.
I've heard it said that it would cost probably $1 billion to do the work. They'd have to strip it down, and it would probably take as long to do that as Trump will be in office.
Mm-hmm. And I don't believe they'll find all the bugs and cameras. I mean, I just don't think, this gang that can't coup straight. I don't think they're really good at like micro electronics. I mean,
it's just disgusting, and we have seen Republicans speaking against it.
But of course, one of those Republicans would not be our Attorney General. Pam Bondi had said, "Yeah, go ahead." What you said?
No, I was going to say about MAGA girl. Of course not.
MAGA Bondi, right?
MAGA Bondi.
We sang about her last week. We may hear from more from her. MAGA Bondi said, "No problem, no problem." You see, Harry. Here's why it's not a problem. Let me just explain the legal reasoning to you, because they've got incredible legal minds up there in Washington. Okay, you see, it's actually a gift to the United States of America. It's not a gift to Donald Trump. And then when he leaves office, it'll be gifted to the austere and august Donald Trump Presidential Library, which right now is a lending library in the bathroom of Mar-a-Lago. But apparently it's going to expand, except they're not just going to leave the plane there as like part of some exhibit. That actually happened with Ronald Reagan. They actually took Air Force One and it's like stationary.
Well, because it was retired. It was retired with Reagan. The current Air Force One was built 40 years ago, right? After it retired with Reagan.
But this plane, he's just going to use it as his private plane. So it's not a gift to Donald Trump. It's just going to be under his exclusive use for his lifetime. You see? So it's not a gift to him. You understand that? You see, you didn't go to law school. You might not be able to follow all these steps. That's okay. They've got it covered. Except they don't. Okay. And here's what Jamie Raskin tweeted about this. It's a pretty simple argument. Trump must seek Congress's consent to take this $300 million gift from Qatar. The Constitution is perfectly clear. No present, quote, of any kind whatever, end quote, from a foreign state without congressional permission. A gift you use for 4 years and then deposit in your library is still a gift, parentheses, and a grift.
Mm-hmm.
So you need Congress's approval, and really up until now, people have been so strict about this. Like you're not allowed to take anything worth more than $20. I remember in the Clinton administration, there's a big debate about whether he could accept like $1,000 bottle of aged whiskey, from the people he's negotiating peace deals with. Like, of course, take the whiskey. What's your problem? Come on, But this is just so. It insults our intelligence. But here, once again, I want to give Chris Murphy some space to talk about even more corruption on steroids with this plane.
The country of Qatar is giving Donald Trump a $400 million plane for his personal use. That apparently is now the going rate. That's how much money you have to put into Donald Trump's pocket if you want favorable national security treatment from the United States of America. We are watching the most massive corruption of our foreign policy in the history of the country. Donald Trump is going to the Middle East in order to receive tribute from nations who know the game is simple. If they want favorable treatment from the United States when it comes to our foreign policy, then they don't have to do anything that supports our own national security. They just have to put money in Donald Trump's pocket. Federal employees can't take a gift of more than $20, and Donald Trump is about to get a $400 million plane. The deal with UAE is in many ways even worse. That deal's worth $2 billion. UAE, in order to get favorable treatment from Donald Trump, has decided that they are going to do a massive economic development deal in Trump coin in order to inflate the price of one of Trump's crypto coins. This cannot be allowed to stand. Our foreign policy cannot simply be a mechanism to make Donald Trump and his family rich. Congress needs to step in and say something and do something about this right now.
And that's why people say that this crypto thing is going to blow up into one of the biggest scandals of our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
That the Saudis are buying this in Trump coin.
Right. Right. So again, but again, this is the thing. It's not enough that he's stealing billions of dollars. It's got to harm America's national security too. I mean, the fact that all these, of course, he's inflating the price, so his fortune is going up because they're pumping it. So basically, part of the way you fluff him or you get favorable treatment from him is drive up the price of his coin and make him rich. But the more the world starts using these coins, okay, instead of for currency, instead of the American dollar. Well, first of all, one of the things that supports our economy is people use dollars. But the other thing is, without some transparency, then all the criminal corruption, all the money laundering, all the illegality, there's no way to trace it. Okay, so he's basically trying to shift the world from a regulated, economy with real money and real records to the whole world running off the books on some kind of criminal, off the books economy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's vile.
Well, so moving on from vile 1 to vile 2, the other thing that we're concerned about is the way in which they're using this immigration issue, both against the immigrants, but also as a way of stripping all of us of our rights of, essentially, of habeas corpus. That's the sort of end game here. And what they're also doing, right? Anyone that stands up against this is going to be in their gun sights.
Yeah, there was this arrest of Newark's mayor on Friday, and the threat to arrest 3 Congress people, 3 representatives from Congress from New Jersey, in the coming days, announced on CNN by this horrible spokesperson. I was appalled by it. I wrote to John saying, this is where we're really seeing freedom collapse, our system collapse. And I watched the talk shows on Sunday, and out of Face the Nation and This Week and Meet the Press, only Dana Bash on State of the Union actually featured an 8 or 9 minute piece on it. And then I did a lot of fumbling around looking for more coverage of it, including body cam coverage. So it's very confusing. I think that's one reason why the press hasn't done much with it, because you can't explain it in 2 minutes. And we see that with the press. It's all about money for them too. So I just wanted to take 5 minutes to really explain it to all of you. So there is an ICE facility that opened up in New Jersey, in Newark, that is highly secret. There was rumors that there were children and women and children and along with, I guess, MS-13 people. I don't know what they're told. But 3 Congress people who are on the oversight committee in Congress asked to have a tour of the facility and to meet people who were being held. And so they showed up, and there's a public space, which is outside the fencing around the facility. That's called the public space. And then there's an interior private space once you walk through the gates. And now the Congress people were in the private section waiting to go in, and the ICE agents, and these are These are Homeland Security investigators. That's HSI, this new kind of police force. And these are the guys who wear, the camouflage or their face covered. They were polite, but they kept stalling them, that they weren't allowed to come in. This went on for an hour or so. There was also a crowd of demonstrators, I don't know, maybe 30, not a lot. Then the mayor showed up and he wanted to join them. So he went from the outside space into the private space. And ICE was saying he couldn't do that. So the mayor went out back into the public space. Meanwhile, they're still waiting and waiting and waiting. And then the head ICE agent gets a phone call and everything changes. He goes out to where the mayor is in public space and arrests him. And the crowd is going crazy around it. There's pushing and shoving. And the representatives who are now back out in the public space are being pushed back and forth. It eventually calms down. The mayor is taken away. And then the ICE agents escort the representatives on a tour of the facility where they meet inmates, they inspect it, they're offered something to drink, and then they're released. Then after this horrible person from the Department of Homeland Security, young and just full of energy, goes on CNN and lies about all of it. And you really have to hear it to believe it. And it was on this broadcast that this woman said they were considering charges against the Congress people. So let me just play you this woman from Homeland Security.
I want to start here just broadly. What happened there at the facility that justified arresting the mayor of the city of Newark?
Thanks, Victor, for having me. I'm glad I can be here to actually give viewers the facts. What happened is that these members of Congress, including the mayor as well, and a mob of protesters, as there was a bus full of detainees going through the gate, they stormed the gate and actually entered the first security checkpoint. This put law enforcement at risk, and this actually put the detainees as well at risk. If any official, including these members of Congress, want to enter the facility and take a tour, DHS is more than accommodating. But just because you're a member of Congress does not mean you can break the law, trespass, put law enforcement at risk, and storm the detention facility. I have yet to hear anyone on this network actually talk about who is in this detention facility. There are members of MS-13, known terrorists, murderers, child rapists. There are some of the worst in this detention facility, and I'm still very confused why these Democrats are so hell-bent on getting these heinous actors out of this facility.
It's all a lie. There was no bus. There was no storming. They did not break into the facility, and they weren't trying to get the people out. There isn't anything true about what she said. And by the way, she has a great makeup job. But besides that, it's horrific. And she was the one who then threatened the representatives. Now, if you really want to hear the story, here is what Dana Bash got out of two of the representatives on Sunday.
Congressman Menendez, as we saw there was a lot of shoving, a lot of shouting going on. It got physical. How did this situation escalate in the first place? And is there anything about what happened looking back and looking at that video that you might regret about how it played out?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think there was a lot of opportunities for DHS, for ICE to de-escalate the situation. They chose not to. There's 3 House members there, the mayor of the largest city. And as you can see in all of the video, and this is important, they had over 20 armed ICE HSI officers. They were heavily armed. Their faces were covered, and they were wearing no identification. So this is who they chose to have come engage with the mayor of Newark and 3 elected members of the House of Representatives. As Congressman Watson-Coleman said, the mayor had gone on to public property. He had de-escalated the situation. We were all on the other side of the fence, on the, let's just call it the private side of the fence. The mayor was on the public side. someone there from HSI got a call, and what happened next was they re-engaged with the mayor. They went on to the public side, and that's where they arrested him. So there were so many instances where this could have all been de-escalated, but it was squarely in HSI ICE's court. They chose not to. They made this a violent scene that we were unfortunately all a part of, and it's something that should really shock all Americans.
And this was an attempt, you were doing an event there, but you were also trying to go forward with part of your job in Congress, which is oversight. Were you able to get any of that oversight actually done? Congresswoman MacIver, I'll send that to you.
Yes, we actually were. I mean, that's why I find it to be appalling that they said we were trespassing, because how are we trespassing? And then you offer us a tour at the end, which is the reason why we were there in the first place, to have a tour of this facility that had just opened up on May 1st. It had over 100 detainees. We were getting reports prior to our tour that children were there. We did not know the status of the facility or the status of the detainees. And so that is why we showed up there to do our job as members, and New Jerseyans count on us to do our job. Immigration has been something that's in the back doors, in the backyards of New Jersey, and it's our jobs to make sure everything is running properly at this facility. So we were able to get a tour towards the end of all of that commotion, all of that chaos. They took us on a tour, offered us a soda in the midst of doing this, never apologized or said anything about the confrontation and the chaos that they caused outside. But we were able to get in, speak to detainees, check out the facilities, and, you know, make sure everything was okay there.
The tour, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman, just to be clear, the tour came after that confrontation?
The tour came after the confrontation, even though we were there at almost 2 hours before the confrontation took place. But ICE kept giving us the runaround and kept saying that they needed to talk to someone else. So finally, when we saw that all of the hierarchy from ICE in the state of New Jersey was on the premises, we were ready to then do the tour. But then this ensued, this conversation they had with the mayor. We were right there on the site with him when they asked him to get off of the property. He willingly moved, quietly moved with dignity and respect. And then chaos ensued when someone on the phone above the leaders of ICE who were with us at the facility instructed them to go out of the facility, go to the private property, and lock the mayor of the largest city in the state of New Jersey up.
You know, Harry,
go ahead.
Okay, these HSI guys, I mean, this is the new SS. You know,
I was just going to say that.
Oh, you're going to say that? Okay, all right. Well, then we're on the same page. I mean, and they keep coming up. They're going to come up in the next sequence as well. Okay, and here's how you recognize them. They've got these black baklavas, so you can't see their face, right? They don't have any identification that identifies who they are or what facility or what agency they're with, right? So it's really this kind of paramilitary force that just, and also what we see is they're extremely rough. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to show a couple of immigrant arrests, okay, that are kind of shocking. But again, if you have time to waste time on TikTok, okay, there's really dozens and dozens of these, and they have something in common. They're just brutal. It's not like a normal arrest. You know what I mean? In a normal arrest, they tell you you're being under arrest. This is what it's for. You have the right to remain silent. They might put cuffs on you. They put you, but here they knock people down. Okay, and often have 5 or 6 people knocking them down. They smash through people's car windows all the time. This is becoming a new normal thing. They have a baton to smash in people's windows. So it's a level of violence also. So they're paramilitary. And by the way, every single authoritarian movement has a paramilitary like this. The Republican National Guard. I forget what they were called in South Africa, but again, an extra military force, right? Right. The extrajudicial killings and tortures. Okay.
Well,
but they're with the regime.
I mean, Hitler didn't the SS was actually a different kind of thing, but the brown shirts were like that. But look, What I want to say though about them,
the brown shirts were his group before he had power. Actually,
true.
the SA is what grew out of the brown shirts, but it's the same idea. The SS became more powerful, but the same idea, which is these paramilitaries are part of your force. They're part of your intimidation, and they don't play by the same rules, right?
No.
So they can beat you up. You can't identify them. They can do what they want to you. They can say you're not there when the lawyer calls and asks if you're in the station. I mean, that they can break all the rules, okay, because they're this like shadowy force. This is very serious.
No, and what I've heard is that that HSI, stands for Homeland Security Investigators, that they actually weren't trained to do this stuff. And so it's like they're being recruited and then said, go out and do whatever you want. One thing I'm going to point out about why I lingered so long on the mayor, Ross Baraka, by the way, is his name. He's running for governor, who was really so measured when interviewed later. He said that actually he was treated very respectfully by the ICE officers, that they held him for like 10 hours and then let him go. But he said he felt that he was well treated. And I'm not saying that in defense of HSI. I'm just saying that this was a very measured mayor who didn't use this to inflame. He was saying this is what happened. But the fact that this can happen, and you can have that horrible person from DHS get on television, lie, and threaten representatives who, by the way, at the beginning of that interview I didn't include, said, we haven't heard anything about our being arrested. No one was going to arrest them for anything. Afterwards, they were given a tour. So this is what we have to look forward to, folks. This is what we have to be on the lookout for, is this kind of intimidation of elected officials. Elected officials.
And I'm going to skip the media because I know we're using up too much time, but just to summarize it, again, they double down. As you say, they threatened now to arrest the 3 Congress people, right? And again, just like that representative lied, they lied about the Congress people. They said that the Congress people, are you ready for this? Body slammed the HSI agents. Now, we had a piece of tape where one of the Congress people, the sort of older African-American woman, she said,
it was the younger one. It was the younger one, the one in the middle.
The older one was on the tape that I was going to show you that we cut out, where she's saying, how could I have body slammed these agents? Like, I weigh like 85 pounds soaking wet. They're like, weigh 200 pounds. They've got all these, protective gear and guns. It's it doesn't even pass the laugh test, right? This little old woman is going to body slam these HSI, a team of HSI agents, whatever. What was that movie about everything all at once where that old Asian woman actually has all these powers and she's fighting all these guys? Maybe that congresswoman is like that. Maybe she's actually some ninja, but I don't think so. And this is the kind of lies they were saying, that they're going to arrest these Congress people because they body slammed these agents, when actually they were the ones who were being roughed up and pushed around in this created melee.
But they won't arrest them because they have no charges to press. It's not true about the judge who's been indicted.
That's right.
But these won't. This is just part of that same kind of assault. It's to threaten people. They're not even going to make good on it. But this will make other people more cautious about doing anything.
Absolutely. I'm just curious, did she body slam him before or after the tour and the sodas?
It was supposedly before.
Yeah, well, that's pretty forgiving. Somebody body slams you, says, all right, well, let's just go have a tour and have some sodas and just forget about the whole thing. All right. So I mean, Harry, but this is disturbing because these total lies, even though we're making fun of them and mocking them, okay, this is playing on Fox TV, right?
Sure.
Because this we talked about Trump's pathological lying. You mentioned it literally at the beginning of every show, okay? But now we have an administration that pathologically lies.
Absolutely.
Okay? I don't know who that cute little blonde girl was from Homeland Security, but she just obviously her main qualification is that she's willing to go up there and lie and completely make stuff up from whole cloth and make it sound very sincere and very wholesome, very American. And I am glad. Thank you for having me on, so I can clear this up and tell the truth. You know, there was a spaceship full of aliens that crashed. You know, like no, there wasn't. But this is scary because they're able to just, it's like a lie factory, right? They're just able to mass produce these lies. Okay. And so this outrageous incident, okay, to half of the country, it's like, oh my God, these congressmen are body slamming. Why are they trying to release the worst people in the world? By the way, everything she said was a lie, and you ticked off the lies. Everything. But one of the things, but the other thing is, I just don't understand why Democrats are trying to release these people, the worst people in the world. You know what? I don't know who they put in that New Jersey facility, but I'm guessing they aren't the worst people in the world. I'm guessing they're just people whose visas expired or who were undocumented and probably working in a restaurant, supporting a family, or you know what I mean? So again, this demonization, I just want to add that that's a lie too. And it's a real calumny because it justifies they're treating them like rabid animals, okay, when they are in fact decent human beings.
Which is page 1 of a fascist playbook. Demonize a minority population.
Right. And speaking of HSI agents, I had a lot of tape to go through, but here's a couple of examples of how the HSI agents are behaving. Here's how they behaved in Worcester.
Stop, ma'am! Stop!
Definitely a chaotic scene on Eureka Street Thursday as Worcester police and ICE agents detained a mother and her 16-year-old daughter. That girl's face slammed into the ground as she was taken into custody. They have not been identified. Worcester police said officers were dispatched to the area for a report of a federal agent surrounded by about 24 people. When police arrived, they say the teen daughter was holding a newborn baby in her arms and standing in front of the ICE vehicle that was trying to leave with their mother inside. Officers told her she was endangering the baby, so she handed the newborn to a relative, but police allege as the ICE vehicle drove away, she ran after it and kicked the side of it. She was arrested and charged with reckless endangerment of a child, disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Also arrested was Ashley Spring of Worcester, who police said pushed multiple officers and threw an unknown liquid substance on them as they tried to arrest the teen. Spring faces several charges, including assault and battery of a police officer. We spoke with Spring moments before she was taken away.
ICE was here, the community gathered. We found out that they didn't have a warrant. They didn't have not just a judicial warrant, they didn't have a warrant at all. They wouldn't present it. And the community decided that these women were free to go, and the women decided to go and exercise their right to leave because they were not being detained. At that point, the police continued to try to brutalize them, to rip the baby out of the mother's arms, 4-week-old baby, it looks like, and the community tried to intervene and help them.
The city manager of Worcester said in a statement, the series of events was no doubt disturbing and the footage of a family being separated is harrowing. He insists that Worcester police were not assisting with the ICE detainment, but they were called in to try to de-escalate a chaotic situation.
One of the things, in addition to how brutal that situation is, one of the things I think is so interesting is that the community gathered. You know, this is liberal Massachusetts, but people poured into the street. And one woman confronted the ICE agent and said, do you have a warrant? And they didn't. Instead, they arrested her. The woman who said, do you have a warrant, got arrested. Allegedly, she pushed someone or threw a drink. Who knows if it's even true? I mean, you can't believe anything they say, you know. But yeah, big threat, right? She really looked like a mortal threat. Yeah, the biggest threat was that she threatened them about whether they had a warrant. It was a threat to their extrajudicial kidnapping. That was her big threat. And I just want to show you one more piece of tape. They talk about Worcester, but this is also from just a local Massachusetts TV station talking about this pattern of HSI agents just kidnapping people, disappearing people.
Videos of violent ICE arrests are spreading across the country 3 months into Donald Trump's second term. Just this week in Massachusetts, several ICE actions went viral on social media. In Newton on Monday, 2 men were forced out of a car as agents smashed in the windows. 1 man was dragged out and tackled by 5 agents. And in Worcester on Thursday, chaos erupted as ICE arrested a woman, and Worcester police arrested 2 others after a crowd formed to challenge the ICE arrest. Worcester police said in a statement that they responded to preserve the peace and prevent anyone from being injured. Local police in Massachusetts are required to report the names of those arrested, but because ICE typically does not, it can be difficult to get information unless the detainee has a lawyer. ICE's secrecy fuels claims that agents are disappearing people with no due process, even in cases when those arrested face criminal charges. One of the men arrested on the Watertown-Newton line this week had faced charges related to abuse allegations. But immigration lawyers say many people arrested often have no records.
I fear that this country is becoming a police state, that folks have their basic constitutional rights are being trampled. It's a terrifying vision of the road that Trump is taking us down.
ICE did not respond to requests for comment, but the Trump administration says it's going after the worst criminals while arresting so-called collaterals in the country illegally. Civil rights experts are calling for greater transparency from ICE. They say withholding information makes it easier to deport people.
Sure does.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, yeah, the more they can get rid of every aspect of due process, right, down to the way they're behaving in terms of the way they're taking people. They can just make any claim they want and just kidnap them and throw them into a van and not even necessarily have to identify that they've done that. So this is the last point I want to make about this. A lot of you have probably seen this video, and you can say that it's not scary, but here's Stephen Miller saying, here's what is the logical next step. Okay. The logical next step would be the suspension of habeas corpus. And just people, in case they don't understand what habeas corpus is, it means show the body. And it's the fundamental legal principle that predates the Constitution. It goes back to the Magna Carta. Okay. In the 1400s, it means you have a right to due process. You have a right to question your detainment in some kind of judicial proceeding. They can't just do what they want to your body. They can't just take you. And yet, here's what Stephen Miller has to say.
Hold on, there's a question back there first.
I have 2 quick questions. First, President Trump has talked about potentially suspending habeas corpus to take care of the illegal immigration problem. When could we see that happen, do you think?
Well, the Constitution is clear, and that, of course, is the supreme law of the land, that the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus can be suspended in a time of invasion. So I would say that's an option we're actively looking at. Look, a lot of it depends on whether the courts do the right thing or not. At the end of the day, Congress passed a body of law known as the Immigration and Nationality Act, which stripped Article 3 courts, that's the judicial branch, of jurisdiction over immigration cases. So Congress actually passed, it's called jurisdiction stripping legislation. It passed a number of laws that say that the Article 3 courts aren't even allowed to be involved in immigration cases. Many of you probably don't know this. I'll give you a good example. Are you familiar with the term temporary protected status, or TPS, right? So by statute, the courts are stripped of jurisdiction from overruling a presidential determination or a secretarial determination on TPS when the Secretary of Homeland Security makes that determination. So when Secretary Noem terminated TPS for the illegals that Biden flew into the country, when courts stepped in, they were violating explicit language that Congress had enacted, saying they have no jurisdiction. So it's not just the courts aren't just at war with the executive branch, the courts are at war, these radical rogue judges, with the legislative branch as well too. So all of that will inform the choices the president ultimately makes, yes.
Mr. Miller. Yeah, it's just up to him to suspend habeas corpus because, again, of this non-existent emergency. So I don't know if the judge in Western Pennsylvania will say, well, yes, you can suspend habeas corpus, but, you need to give them. Well, no, I mean, that once you've suspended habeas corpus, that's it.
No. If you have due process, you have habeas corpus.
Right. Exactly. Right. And if you don't, you don't.
Also, I heard legal scholars say what he said was just nonsense right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what the legislation says. It may be how he's interpreting it. And the courts have every right to comment on these cases.
But again, this is the information where they're rogue judges.
If they do the right thing, then we don't have to suspend habeas corpus, John.
Yeah, right. Right. Exactly. If they play ball, we won't have to abrogate the fundamental rights of the Constitution. Your choice.
It's up to them.
Exactly. All right. So, this is really what we're keeping an eye on, because this is our fundamental right, not to be kidnapped and basic. And the other thing I want to say about these prisons, by the way, that they're sending people to, they're building a new one in Libya, I think, or
he's asking
he wants
for that. He's
in
asking.
5 different countries. When Trump was first elected, and I was talking about him being a malignant narcissist like Hitler, I did a lot of interviews, okay? But I often was asked the same challenge. Come on, you're comparing him to Hitler. It's not like he's going to have concentration camps. That was something, a challenge I often got. I said, yes, he will. Quote me on it, write it down, and then check with me after it's happened. Okay. And in fact, he did build concentration camps in his first term. He built out all these camps in the desert to hold 250,000 immigrants. But when the child separation policy, this is what you mean about pushback. That was the first time Trump really got real pushback with that child separation. First, he was going, you have to take the children. You have to take the children. Well, you don't, you evil piece of shit. But you have to take them. No, the country was... That was so morally abhorrent to the country that was where they reached their vomit reflex and said no. And so he got the pushback, and he backed off from the child separation, and he kind of backed off from filling the concentration camps. But I remember when I was explaining this, I said, now look, concentration camps aren't the same as death camps, right? The Japanese internment camps were concentration camps. The definition of a concentration camp is you're concentrating a population you consider to be undesirable, for religion or ethnic, and you're concentrating them in a certain area that they can't get out of. Basically, it's a big prison. That's a concentration camp. But I didn't say he would do death camps. But you see, Harry, even I underestimated his evil, because if you're sent to El Salvador, you're never going to come out of there alive. Never. And also, some of these are really work camps. So in a sense, you're being sold into slavery. They're just going to work you until you die or until someone murders you.
And that's why we're starting to see some pushback on this notion of putting these people in camps outside the country.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of of Democratic and just legal reformers are really pushing very hard about this. And we'll see if we can push them back. It's just awful.
Well, speaking about resistance, and I've got some good news. I don't know if Jews are allowed to do this, but I've become a papist. I love Leo. Because the way the papers spun his, being elected, of course, is very meaningful that he was an American. But the other thing that they said is, well, he was a compromise candidate, because there was a belief or a fear that the next candidate would be more conservative. And what I was afraid of is that we were going to get essentially the 21st century version of Pope Pius, the Pope who basically bended over for Hitler. There's some controversy about that, but he really did. And so I was afraid if we got another conservative, then that this would be just the time for them to pull a Pius. Instead, they describe him as a compromise candidate, as middle of the road. Why? Because theologically, he is somewhat conservative. He is not for the ordination of women. Well, guess what? The Catholic Church was not going to be ordaining women anytime soon, no matter who they picked as Pope. All right. But he's a radical, woke, hair on fire liberal when it comes to immigration and the poor.
And the poor.
And the poor. That is his thing. And so what I love about this is I think he's going to become a real opposition figure to Trump. MAGA thinks so too. They're calling him the woke Pope. But I think that actually, in some ways, Trump propelled him into being elected, because he had already come out with a lot of strong public statements rebuking the Trump administration. Okay. So they elected the most anti-Trump candidate that they had. I think they had one really left-wing, super left-wing candidate, and he was not, the people couldn't agree on him. It was sort of like Francis plus. But the person they agreed on is theologically conservative, but he's not MAGA. He's anti-MAGA.
Well, and just to put a fine point on it, Francis was able to fill the College of Cardinals with his appointees. So that it was going to be somewhere toward Francis's direction. Francis was a very powerful figure, as well as a very genial and fascinating character. And also, this Pope spent many, many years in Peru working with the poor. He partakes in liberation theology, which is sort of a progressive Catholic wing. He speaks Spanish, Italian, and English. So he wasn't just a Chicago person; he's international, and like Pope Francis, has roots in South America.
Right. So let's see this article about the woke Pope. MAGA says Pope Leo may be American, but he's not America first. It is shocking to me that a guy could be selected to be the Pope that had the Twitter feed and the statements that he's had against American senior politicians, said Bannon, a hard-right Trump loyalist and a practicing Catholic and former altar boy. The Pope's brother, John Prevost, told the New York Times that he thinks his brother would voice his disagreements with the president. Quote, I know he's not happy with what's going on with immigration, he said. I know that for a fact. How far he'll go with it is only one's guess. He won't just sit back. I don't think he'll be the silent one. Well, he hasn't been silent so far. He's already bitch slapped J.D. Vance. I think to restore, and this is very important to me, actually, to restore the heart of true Christian charity and ethics at the heart of the Catholic Church. We've seen the evangelical church in this country, the white evangelical church, be completely corrupted. If there is a Satan, he's in charge of the American evangelical church, period. And if there is an Antichrist, it may well be Trump. But it's nice to see the Catholic Church going the other way and affirming the true values of Christianity. So why did he slap down J.D. Vance? Well, because J.D. Vance tried to do a little theological reasoning of his own about what your neighbor is, as far as loving your neighbor is concerned, and how that might relate to immigrants. So here's a quote. Here is a tweet from then Robert Prevost, and before he was Pope Leo. It's the tweet at the top of his account. Okay, it's not the pinned tweet, but it is at the top of his account. This is where he rebukes J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus doesn't ask us to rank our love for others. Okay, so what is he talking about? Let's go see the article that he's quoting. He's got a link to this article in an obscure Catholic journal. The title of the article is J.D. Vance is wrong. Jesus does not ask us to rank our love for others. The internet has been buzzing since Vice President J.D. Vance said during a Fox News interview on January 29th, there's a Christian concept that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens, and then after that, prioritize the rest of the world. A lot of the far left has completely inverted that.
That is such garbage. Where did he get that from? There's nothing like that in the New Testament. I mean, like nothing, just the opposite.
Actually, I was going to say, there's a lot of the opposite in the New Testament.
Tons.
I mean, Jesus even says, look, even the Gentiles and the sinners love their own children and love the people that love them. That doesn't give you squat. That's meaningless. Okay. The Christian ethic is that you would love your neighbor as yourself, that you would love all humanity, all human beings. Right. So here's the perversity of an evil of these people. J.D. Vance is making up an anti-Christian principle, literally the inversion, like a black mass, like an upside down cross, the inversion of Christian ethics, while accusing the left of inverting Christian ethics.
Yeah, no, it's he's tied himself to a knot, and this is a guy who's a recent convert to Catholicism.
Right. So I think the Pope, kind of trumps him as far as theological understanding is concerned.
I'm glad he pointed that out. That's really good.
Yeah, me too. Now, also, let's see what he said about the immigrants being sent to El Salvador. I think this may be his top tweet. I got them confused. This is the one that's at the top of his account. As Trump and Bukele use the Oval Office to laugh emoji, about the Fed's illicit deportation of a U.S. resident, once an undocumented Salvadorian himself, now D.C. Auxiliary Bishop Evalio asks, so he's quoting a bishop who is confronting this situation, do you not see the suffering? Is your conscience not disturbed? How can you stay quiet?
Wow.
Pope Leo's not going to stay quiet.
I don't think so.
Also, he's a guy from Chicago, and Chicago, it's kind of like, well, we're from New York, they're like the Midwestern New York, they're tough. They're just a little nicer about it. They smile before they tell you to go fuck yourself.
Well, what I've been told is that he considers himself to be an introvert, but he's also known to really speak his mind and be very direct. So I have a feeling he'll be quietly but powerfully direct.
Well, it may not even be that quietly. Here's what he had to say about the war in Ukraine.
Claro, este es un problema gravísimo que está afectando a todo el mundo. Hay muchos análisis que se dan al conflicto, a la guerra que se está sufriendo actualmente en Ucrania, pero desde mi punto de vista se trata de una auténtica invasión imperialista donde Rusia quiere conquistar un territorio por motivos de poder y pues ventaja propio de Rusia por el tema de la ubicación estratégica, como también por el gran valor de lo que es Ucrania, culturalmente, como también históricamente y también en producción para Rusia. Y se está cometiendo, ya está comprobado, hay crímenes contra la humanidad que se están cometiendo en Ucrania. Hay que pedir mucho a Dios por la paz, pero yo creo que hay que ser más claros nosotros también. Incluso algunos políticos en nuestro país no quieren reconocer los horrores de esta guerra y de la maldad que Rusia está pues realizando en toda su actuar.
There were subtitles for those of you who are listening on Spotify or just audio. He goes out of the way to accuse Russia of doing this for its own gain. He indicts them for their war crimes, and he says that all of us should speak out against the horrors of war being conducted by Russia. It is a very powerful statement. What do you think?
Very powerful statement, and he's not pulling any punches. Yes, I apologize. It was a long Italian.
I love it.
But his words were very, very powerful. And here's the last piece of tape I'm going to show. This is just a little hint of things to come. A reporter asked him if he has any message for America.
Father, any message for the United States?
You have any message for the United States? Many. And then he walks away. So I'm looking forward to those many messages, those encyclicals. I love Leo. It really.
I'm glad you're happy. Well, at least you don't have to become. At least you won't become Pope this week.
Thank God. I'm sure a lot of other people are thanking God too. But seriously,
many.
Many. I'm glad they don't have to see that comedy routine again. But in all seriousness, I am buoyed. I am really buoyed by
me too.
His elevation. Well, Harry, one thing about Trump being demented is he's demented every week. Okay. There isn't a week that goes by when he's not demented. There's sometimes weeks we don't talk about it, sometimes weeks where he doesn't expose it, but he's demented every week. Well, here's just a little nothing, but here he's talking about the nation of Mattel.
Mattel, I don't know, I'm not so sure. They also said, they're the only country I've heard, they said, well, we're going to go counter. We're going to try going someplace else. That's okay. Let him go, and we'll put 100% tariff on his toys, and he won't sell one toy in the United States, and that's their biggest market. I heard that. I mean, I watched this guy talking about how I'm going to go counter. I said, well, I wouldn't want to have him as an executive too long.
Going to put a tariff on the country of Mattel. Then they won't be able to sell their dolls here anymore.
Then
no more MAGA Barbie.
No, but then it drifted into becoming a guy who's selling Barbies, and then, but still the tariffs, and I mean
yeah,
it's the weave.
Yeah, it's the weave, and he's often in Barbie land. Okay. And speaking of Barbie land, actually, there is a report from Barbie land.
Oh, let's see it.
This is Maya May reporting live from the country of Mattel, where President Trump is set to meet with President Barbie to discuss the potential release of Ken, who is being held without due process in CCOT. According to Ice Barbie, Ken has tattoos that are indicative of his membership in MS-13.
Anyway. Well, I'm very excited that today we have Dr. Ros Watts. We've actually been trying to get her on the show for months and months. So Dr. Watts is really a leader in the field of psychedelic medicine. She's the clinical lead at the Imperial College London for a whole series of their clinical trials that they've been doing there for years. She's been named one of the 50 most influential people in psychedelic science and one of the top 16 women in psychedelic science. I actually got to know her when interviewing her for my book. And I found her to be one of the most fascinating people that I interviewed. She really had a very unique perspective on the spiritual experiences that patients were having, the mystical experiences patients were having on psilocybin. It actually changed her theological position, experiencing what her patients were experiencing. But also she has focused on the effect of psychedelics in connecting people to themselves, to nature, and to others. And she believes that that may be the most curative aspect of psilocybin therapy. And she's actually developed a scale, the Watts connectedness scale, that she's used in research and has shown empirically that people who feel more connected after a psilocybin therapy experience are actually more clinically improved. So there's a connection between having that experience of cosmic connectedness, if you will, and an improvement in mental health. And since then, she's gone on. Go ahead, Harry, what were you going to say?
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt. John, I'm so excited about this interview, but if you could, since a lot of our viewers really know nothing about psilocybin treatment, I just was hoping you could begin with Dr. Watts, just in setting the groundwork for what this looks like typically, and then talk about the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I was just going to add that she's one of the founder of ACER, which is a group that helps people integrate their psilocybin experience over a period of a year, which I think is actually really needed. That's actually in my book. That's what I did. I followed people for a year and saw how much growth took place after their trip. So with no further ado, let's interview Dr. Watts. It's really great to see you again.
Oh, thank you. It's lovely to see you again, and really so thrilled to be invited on this podcast. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, you know, we've worked very hard for months to get you. So, so one of the things that happened after the election is our listeners started to turn to us as psychologists and say, okay, so now how can you help us cope with what has happened and what is happening? And of course, what is happening is really genuinely catastrophic at some level. And so it does raise a kind of existential question, right, of how we cope with true catastrophe, you know, not just things that are neurotic suffering, but real catastrophes in real life. Harry, before you came on, he asked that maybe you could introduce us a little bit to what psilocybin therapy is, but then maybe you could also help us transition to how it might help us to cope.
Yes. I love thinking about the why, like, why are we doing this? What's it actually going to do in the real world? And actually, yeah, that's a lovely framing. So So essentially, psychedelic therapy, the way I worked in it for nearly a decade, and now I focus more on the integration side, but many years in the clinic, is one person on their own in a kind of hospital room with usually two therapists, sometimes one, but usually two. And it's a very long process. It's a whole day, but even more than that, because there's a preparation day the day before and there's an integration day the day afterwards. So it's a kind of like 3-day event, one of these sessions, which people really need, because people came to our trial with long-standing depression, lots of childhood trauma, and a lot of anxiety about taking a psychedelic, which is really sensible to be quite anxious about it, because these experiences for people that haven't had one before, or maybe even people that have had one before in an unsafe setting, these experiences can be utterly terrifying. They are certainly, you're opening yourself up to a very, very deep and profound experience that can be harrowing. One of the kind of metaphors or analogies that people use is it's kind of like childbirth. You're almost like birthing yourself. And I've gone through childbirth myself. It really is that kind of initiation. It's kind of, I mean, I've probably had psychedelic experiences that are probably harder actually than actual childbirth, because the intensity of emotion and pain. I mean, sometimes people describe feeling all of the world's pain in kind of one go, and it's a lot to go through. But they can also be extraordinary and beautiful. And there's something about that opening, that kind of being cracked open, that it feels like a relief. People often haven't cried for a very long time. They've been holding a lot of stress. And there's this kind of upswelling of just something that feels true and real and authentic. And there's this, you're cracking open, and that feels like a relief. And you really do need good therapists with you for the whole day. There's a music playlist playing. People are often lying on the kind of couch with the headphones and the eye shades, and they may be sometimes lying completely silently, and you have no idea what's going on. But sometimes there's this absolute, like people can go back into traumatic experiences of their past, or just experience a lot of intense feelings. So the therapists that are there really have an important role, even though it's not always active. You try not to say too much, you try not to intrude, but at the end of the day, people often take off the eye shades and take off the headphones and you look at you with this kind of bright, shining eyes that are often tear-stained, but their faces look like there's a kind of glow. They've been through sometimes 6 hours of really intense challenge, but there is that sense of like release and something quite beautiful that emerges often.
And some of these experiences, have a spiritual component. They certainly make people feel more connected to the universe and to other people. How can this, in the face of what is really a real catastrophe, not just an imaginary one, how can those experiences help people to cope, do you think?
I think there's something about, so one of the analogies I've used for a psychedelic experience is it's like a diving underneath the surface of the sea. It's like a pearl dive, diving down into the bottom of the sea, looking for oysters. And so if you think about, and I'm going to try and kind of tie this into the experience of daily life, certainly for people in the States, but also for people kind of all around the world, all of us who are looking at the dominant systems of power with just utter rage, utter disbelief and rage. I think there's something about in your everyday experience where you feel that you're treading water. You've got all the stresses of daily life. You don't just have the worry about the latest crazy thing that this politician has done. And you don't have the kind of like those things. You also have your daily life pressures. You also have your, extremely overwhelming modern lives. And I think that the overwhelming nature of modern lives is kind of there. Maybe I'm a little bit cynical and kind of conspiracy thinking about it, but I feel like it's there for a reason. It keeps us treading water. We have to wave after wave, like smashes us in the face. So we can't see anything because we're just trying to float. And because it's so overwhelming with the stresses and the fear, but also the fact that we don't live in communities that are supportive. We don't live with a village. We are so isolated, so atomized, and we are each individual kind of unit is expected to do the work of a whole village every day. You know, it's just all the different plates that we're spinning, all the different, because we don't live in community where we share the labor and share the fears and sit around the fire at the end of the day to kind of cry together and process. We don't have any of those old structures that communities need. So we just have all these ways to numb. We have the TV, we have alcohol, we have social media, we have all these numbing and distraction techniques. So we get so used to this mode of numbed out swimming against the waves. And what a psychedelic experience is, and you actually don't need to take psychedelics to do this. You can do this with breath work or vision quest or all sorts of different things. But it's a decision to dive down beneath the surface of those waves for a day. You take a day, you take the time, you don't forget about all the other things you have to think about. And you've done your preparation. You dive down with your diving instructor, you know, you're alone, you dive down to the bottom of the sea, and you really face those big things, those big feelings that you kind of can't really focus on when you're treading water. And when you get down to the bottom, the analogy is like, you know, you look for the spiky oyster shells, which are those kind of big, spiky, painful. I mean, oyster shells are pretty ugly looking things. They're very tightly shut, but you kind of open it up and you make space for it and you sit with it, you allow it, you go towards it rather than numbing or distracting or avoiding. And you purposefully, with this guide with you, you open it up, and it's like inside the oyster, that spiky layer of defense, there's the actual oyster, which is slimy. And that's all the like disgust and the shame and all of those other uncomfortable feelings. But then if you sit with that long enough, then you get to the pearl, which is the lessening of that pain. It's the insight. It's the moment of, this is what I care about. This is what my grief teaches me about what I love and I want to stand for. And so then the idea is then you find the pearl and then you swim with all your might up to the surface of the sea. And it's like you can see clearly. You're not swimming against those waves anymore. You're saying, this is what matters. This is my humanity. This is what life is about. This is what love is about. This is what I want to bring to my life. And even though I've got all these things and it's busy and it's stressful and it's hopeless, this is my pearl. And I'm going to live with that pearl. Like, I'm going to let that pearl change the way I live. So even though the times are awful, I still have that pearl, and it brings connectedness, truth, and beauty, I think, to very difficult situations.
You know, that's such a beautiful metaphor, and I'm so touched by it. I'm also really intrigued by your saying there's other ways of getting to those experiences, and I'm not suggesting that that other ways are better at all, because this sounds very powerful. I know, speaking with John about it, but you know, in my own experience in a relational psychoanalysis, where I've had to really confront my attachments and my relationship to my analyst and also to myself, I found that I had to face the worst things and ultimately embrace them and accept them. And it's a process I hope that my patients will go through. And to hear you talk about this in such a powerful way, as if you're taking a day and really helping the brain to confront it, sounds very intriguing, and I'm glad that you're describing it to us.
Oh yeah, it's a very, very good point about the different kind of, well, you didn't make the point so specifically, but I'm wondering if you're also wondering about the timing, because obviously with psychoanalysis, it's years and years of this deep process, and I talk about, you know, this thing happening in a day. And I really feel like it's a very good and important point, actually. I think that when I first discovered psychedelics, I was such a kind of enthusiast, and I was actually had a team of psychodynamic therapists and psychoanalysts that I'd worked with for a long time. And they were kind of my mentors and my elders, and I just loved them. And when I first started working in psychedelic therapy, I went back to this place I'd worked and said, I'm working in psychedelics and all the defenses get, you know, melted away. It's so wonderful. And I remember my kind of dear therapist mentor saying, I wonder. And actually 10 years on from that kind of conversation, I do feel that there is some wisdom in the slower path, actually, and some of the issues and kind of very sadly, I think the psychedelic field, it certainly hasn't been the kind of answer to everything that I'd hoped it would be. And relevant to this conversation, there is this unfortunate thing of like psychedelic narcissism that happens when people do it too quickly, I think, without doing the real relational work. And so, yeah, I think a psychedelic day on its own is definitely the beginning of the journey, not the whole journey. And the relational work after, it's really important to help people continually do this deep diving work.
I think that's wonderful, because I really was heading toward not a skeptical response, but wondering about an integration of the two. And especially hearing from John about your work afterwards and helping to strengthen the relational gains that people make, which I want to hear more about too. But John, I want you to take the next question, because you have other things to ask.
Well, no. Just to follow up on what you're both talking about, though. I mean, in the book, I say Freud would be shocked that in one day you could have such massive insight. But on the other hand, he would be perfectly comfortable with the idea that then you take years to work through those insights. And I think that is something the psychedelic field has somewhat neglected, which is the hard, long-term, less maybe glamorous work of doing the long-term integration. So in the book that I'm writing, I followed 5 people for a year. And I noticed your ACER group is 13 months, so about the same amount of time. I followed them for a year and meeting with them once a month, and saw how their insight grew, how they worked it through in their lives, how the mindfulness that they got from their experience, helped them address very concrete day-to-day problems in a different way, without the same narrative, without the same story that they'd been telling themselves. And by the way, you mentioned breathing. A lot of people may not know about this, and also I want to mention it because psychedelic therapy is not that readily available yet, unfortunately, right? You either have been a clinical trial at Imperial College London, where I actually trained for part of my work, and then, although I didn't know you then, or you go to Amsterdam or go to Oregon, or see an underground practitioner, which is not technically legal. So the Wim breathing technique is a way of creating basically hyperventilation that deprives oxygen to the brain, and the first thing that shuts down is the default mode network, which is actually what happens on a PET scan. We can see when people take psychedelics and when they meditate. So all 3 of these have that same effect. When you get your default mode network to shut up, that's your narrative story that you tell yourself all day long. When you get that to shut up and the rest of the brain lights up, and then you can hear what the rest of the brain has to say. And maybe some of that brain is the pearl that's maybe connected to your essence. Spiritual people would say that's your soul, and that it's connected to the larger brain, which made me want to remind you of something in our conversation. You said before you started doing this research, you were an atheist, and doing this research changed your mind. I just wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, it's been quite a profound journey, really, the whole thing. And yeah, I was brought up atheist. My mom was very kind of just not interested in religion at all. I didn't have any particular beliefs, but actually through her lifetime as well, she had some interesting spiritual experiences, so that she actually, herself had some openings. But yeah, through the psychedelic work, I think one of the things is when you're sitting with people describing these incredibly profound experiences, some of which were deeply mystical experiences, and also just kind of some like transpersonal phenomena that would happen in those experiences. I would not for me, but for the participants. But also just there's a particular field that you get into when you're sitting in that room where, I don't know, it's difficult to describe the energetics of that place, but I felt myself changed by it and feeling like there was something greater. It gives me faith. And I now have a really deep sense that we are held by something larger, and that we are connected at our roots.
I was just going to ask if that spiritual belief you have is that this is the source of connectedness itself. Is that where you're going?
It feels, how to even describe it? I don't even know if I suppose it's something around there being maybe one way of describing it is this. So the connectedness scale that you mentioned before, John, it's a psychometric tool. It's a questionnaire for measuring connectedness to self, others, and the world. And this was based around participants who had been part of a psychedelic trial at Imperial. They'd had depression, they had psilocybin sessions. And then these items were based on a qualitative research project I did where I interviewed them all and asked them how psilocybin changed them. So all the items, there's 19 items on this measure, and they all relate to this process of expansion. So it's like you go from being trapped in your mind to kind of like opening up. Your mind feels somehow more connected to your heart. You feel more connected to your emotions, more connected to your body. Then you feel more connected to other people, both loved ones, but also the sense of connecting to strangers and a sense of global connectedness with humans you've never met, and deep empathy towards people all over the world. And then beyond that, kind of like connecting to nature, connecting to animals, and then this is where it gets a bit spiritual. Well, all of it's spiritual really, and maybe to come back, Tara, to your kind of like, what is that spirituality? What's it made of? It goes from connecting to nature to connecting to a source of universal love and a sense that everything is interconnected. And so it's those two things. It's a source of universal love, that it's almost like that love is kind of like the fabric, that everything is woven together in this kind of benign fabric of interwoven meaning. And that we don't really see it in our day-to-day lives, but then when we have these experiences, we feel how it's the cliche of the hippies in the 60s. It's the unity. It's the we are all one and we are all love. And yeah.
Well, the hippies were taking psychedelics.
They were. They were.
That's what made them hippies.
Yeah. Yes. And also they used to love hugging trees. And so I started.
There you go.
I'm going to try that too. And you can almost feel, if you hug a tree, you can almost feel an energy. Like, well, you can, I think you feel that this is a living creature. And I think that you can have that sense of there's being it's not just a thing, it's a living thing. And somehow it has consciousness too.
I know when I was a boy, I remember realizing that the trees were just big plants, that they were alive. By the way, as far as the hippies go, they also had the Beatles, for which I will forever be grateful.
All you need is love, their hypothesis is there.
It's right. That's true.
Well, you had a guided meditation that I actually used, you sent it to me in answer to my question about how we can use psychedelics to cope. And one of the things I loved about it is it's a guided meditation where you walk into this ruined forest, totally destroyed and burnt out, and you first have to really face and feel the devastation and the destruction. But then eventually, mushrooms come back, and then moss, and then plants, and then trees, and then birds. And it's really, I think about Kali and the life force, in Hinduism, this sense that the life force that exists in the universe. And I think that's part of what people feel when they're connecting to nature. They feel connected to what's behind nature, as it were, what Harry was referring to, that life force or that force of love that you're talking about. But in your guided meditation, first people have to feel the devastation of the total destruction, and then experience that the life force, which is something way beyond us, cannot be killed, cannot be suppressed. So you can burn down the whole forest, and that is a tragedy. And that is we're kind of in that phase right now, that burnt forest phase or burning forest phase. But that there's a kind of faith, not an intellectual faith, but a kind of a deep, intuitively felt faith that the life force will come again, will rise again. This is not the end. We may not live to see it, but that the life force will come back. And in my mind, that is actually the deepest reassurance, because it acknowledges the reality of what we're facing. It doesn't minimize it, but it says there's a life force more powerful than Donald Trump, and more powerful than all these fascist oligarchs and all this disinformation, all this crap. Okay, it's more powerful than all of that, and it's real. So I just want to first of all say your meditation helped me. I don't know where it's available that other people could use it, but I also wanted maybe you to kind of speak to that idea.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for listening to it. And I'm really, really glad you liked it. Yes, I wrote that when I was, I had a big medical kind of clinical, like surgery kind of operation thing. It wasn't anything scary, but it was like a big, big operation, preventative one that I had to have. So it meant I had to have 2 months off work. And I was feeling this, it was around the same time that Trump got elected. It was just afterwards. So it was like, oh, I was very kind of alone with my thoughts about it and my horror, and kind of didn't have the distraction of other things. I was just kind of sitting in this kind of stew of rage. And then I think I first started feeling, as the scars in my skin were healing, I had this feeling of all the cells in my body coming together to go to these places of like real incision and blood and deep wounds, and coming together and healing it, and not healing it, not making it disappear, but making a scar, like making this map, these lines of where my body had gone through this awful thing, but the whole body, the whole collective had sent help. And there was this line, this ridge that would never go away, but it's like, this is where the collective came in to seal the gap. And so I felt like the devastation that's happening, the burning of, and then the LA fires happened as well. It was around that time. So it was like, there was another layer. I was like, oh yeah, that kind of, that sense of inflammation in the world and fire. And like, I could feel the pain around my scars. So it was this embodied feeling of inflammation, and then inflammation in the world. But then this feeling of like, we can handle anything if we handle it together.
That's so wonderful. And I'm thinking back to your first meditation of the oyster shells, the ugly oyster shells. And it makes me think of the fact that we have to embrace the anger in ourselves and the death that's in ourselves in order to be able to integrate that with the life that we have, which is generated by love. So you've given me so much to think about.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so pleased. And actually, yes, you asked about the meditation, and it is available actually it's on the ASA integration website, and it's not very expensive, and people can access both a video, which we made, which is about a forest that has regenerated after a fire. So we went to a forest that had burnt down in the UK and made this film. We found this amazing, huge tree, and this idea of like, there will be veteran trees that survive the fires that will go on. So it was like in the shade of this huge tree that had lived for probably 1,000 years. And then we made the film all about the different stages of restoration and ecological regeneration after a fire. And then the journey that you did, the meditation, they're both available together for, I think, £10. So it's really not expensive, and we hope people will use them. So yeah, ASA integration website, we hope people will find it helpful. I don't know whether I'm a little bit idealistic, but I still have this sense of hope that even in these, sometimes in the most challenging times, people come together more. Do you see that happening in America?
Yes.
Yeah, and hope is what we were actually hoping to get from you. One of our guests calls it hopium. So we describe ourselves as pushers of hopium on this show. We mostly gloom and doom, but then we have to bring a little hopium to keep our viewers alive till the next week. So thank you for that,
John. I think we're not pushing it; we're giving it out. We're not selling it.
Well, that is very helpful to us and to our viewers. We're out of time, but I really want to thank you for coming on. It was worth waiting for.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and sending solidarity and love to everybody.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. Bye-bye. Good
so
talking
much.
to you.
Bye bye.
Well, I don't know about you, Harry, but I actually found that interview very inspiring.
No, she was great. I have to say, besides being a lovely person, something that the audience may not pick up on, which is she's very clearly a powerful therapist. Her ability to evoke feelings and to receive them, even in the way she spoke to the two of us, was really impressive. She must be just very effective and very sought after, is my sense.
Well, and I'm glad we finally had someone from the psychedelic space on, because it's an area that a lot of people are interested in, but not many people have had a chance to experience fully in the form of the psychedelic therapy that she was participating in the clinical trials of. But I think it does speak to some experience of existential hope, right, that we can reach in a kind of, she's talking about people experiencing a kind of cosmic force of love, and the sense that it's going to be okay because that force is in control, and that force is not going to allow all that is good and all that is alive to die. But some things may have to die first. And that is part of the cycle. But to have some faith in the greater life force is, I think, one of the things to give us hope when we are seeing true destruction. So even though things might actually be on fire, that doesn't mean that all hope is lost.
And, earlier at the show, I said that John and I each have 2 other jobs besides this. And for me, I have a private practice and I teach at Cornell. For John, it's his practice and also his research into psychedelic psychotherapy, which I think is going to culminate in a very important book, and which I think I'm glad that the audience has had a chance to hear something about it.
Well, Harry, I guess we're up to the shrink wrap portion of the show. What have we learned this week?
Well, for me, I have less hope and more hope. I have a bit more hope because I'm seeing the judiciary push back, because I'm seeing some people like Chris Murphy really pushing hard. And I'm having a bit more hope because I'm seeing Trump pull back from the brink as he charges at it. And it gives me a little bit more hope, but it also gives me less hope because by his pulling back from extreme but still destructive things, he might maintain this
destructive trajectory.
So one week I'm feeling like we're gonna be okay. Other weeks I feel like I'm not so sure. And now I'm finding it's in different ways. And I just want to take my experience, not as a given, or not proclaiming that my experience is right, but maybe to give it an example of what we're all experiencing, which is we have someone in charge we do not trust. We don't believe he has our best interests at heart. We don't believe he's defending the Constitution or the country or the world order. We have to live with that every day. And sometimes his administration does terrible things and seems to get away with it. Some days they do terrible things and they don't get away with it. Sometimes they even seem to do things that aren't too terrible. Like sometimes that happens too. And it's all part of what we have to observe. And when I think about our wonderful guest and about this notion that attachment is what really brings love and well-being. And it's certainly true in the research literature that attachment predicts happiness and psychological well-being. We always have to remember that, because that's what will sustain us and will persist after we're gone.
No, that's very well put. And I think you're right. It is such a combination of horror and hope, right? I mean, the horror of this Caligula carnival of corruption, it is just vomitacious. It's just beyond belief. And not just in terms of its perversity, but in terms of its, you mentioned he's not upholding the Constitution, he's not defending the country. No, he's actually doing the opposite, right? He's trying to destroy the Constitution. He seems to be trying to destroy America's security. So that's what it is. Not just that he's not doing it really seems like he is trying to burn down our civilization and our way of life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And in a way, what you're saying is like these wildfires going. It's like, well, the firemen have kept the fire from spreading as fast. Well, that's good news, but it's also bad news, right? Because that means the fire is spreading, right? The HSI agents are getting more bold. And they're attacking congressmen. They've indicted a judge. They're knocking people down. They're disappearing people. They're becoming more lawless and more reckless. And it's going to get. I think that part is going to get worse. On the other hand, as you say, there are judges who are pushing back or bending over and not breaking in some cases, but still insisting on due process. So we're also seeing that counter movement.
And those ICE encounters are being videotaped, filmed on people's cameras. And that's really important because we have to have the evidence. We have to have it and see it and think about it.
And one thing that is also giving me hope is Pope Leo. Pope Leo leads billions of Catholics, and he gets it, okay? He gets it. He understands what's happening. And he's going to use his bully pulpit, which is the biggest on the planet, all right, to expose this evil and to be a Christian witness for loving your neighbor, right, and being attached and connected to humanity, right? These fundamental principles, right, that really transcend sectarianism. He will be a voice for that. And at a time when we need a voice, especially when Christianity is being perverted to do the devil's work, we need a true voice of Christian morality with some authority and some balls to speak up.
Listen, we need him, and we need all the voices we can get. John made me aware of a new psychological issue in our country. While MAGA girls may be missing their Barbies this Christmas, another problem lies under the radar: MAGA male loneliness, or MAML. There just aren't enough MAGA women to go around. So men with red hats have been showing up at their Christian counseling centers, bewildering the therapists with their complaints, because MAGA therapists can't understand why everyone isn't happy. I mean, after all, this is post-Biden America. So John has been volunteering at one of these clinics, and you've come up with a musical treatment for their woes, right, John?
Well, Harry, first of all, thank you for bringing up MAML. MAML is a serious problem that affects nearly half of the men in America, that they are making themselves essentially unattractive to women. They become involuntarily celibate because most sane women find them repulsive. So we really have a doll shortage at two levels. We have a shortage of dolls for the children. We also have a shortage of dolls for the MAGA men. So here is my solution. Hit it, Rex. I'm gonna buy a MAGA Bondi all my own. A dolly that the MAGAs can't steal. And with their flirty, flirty eyes and their flirty MAGA lies, you'll have to find dollies that are real. When I come home at night, she will be waiting. She'll be the truest MAGA of them all. I'd rather have a MAGA doll to call my own than an independent, real life girl. Can I have this dance, MAGA Bondi?
Dean Martin, I understand.
Hey.
Dan Roman, too. Thanks for being with us here on Shrinking Trump. I promise next week John won't be dancing, at least in the beginning. Hope to see you then. Take care.